214 ranches did not lose their cattle to a storm, a drought, or a disease outbreak. They lost them on paper. The first warning arrived on a Tuesday morning, when sale barns across Bellwether County were ordered to freeze every brand tied to a disputed loan portfolio. By noon, gates were chained, checks were stopped, and families who had raised the same bloodlines for generations were told the animals standing in their pastures might legally belong to a finance company 3 states away. 6 weeks earlier, 74-year-old Walter Gann had paid $38 for a battered leather brand book at a county surplus auction. Its spine was split. Its pages smelled of mildew, dust, and old cattle pens. Younger ranchers laughed when Walter lifted it from the box, and the county records director told him the book had been obsolete since the files went digital. Walter did not argue. He only ran one cracked thumb across a row of hand-drawn marks and asked why someone had cut 3 pages from the middle. No one answered. Now that same records director stood outside the locked sale barn, staring at a tablet that said Walter's own herd had been pledged against a loan he never signed. Walter carried the old book beneath his coat, knowing it might prove the database had been altered. But one of the signatures inside belonged to his dead brother. And before Walter could save anyone else's cattle, he would have to learn whether the man he had defended for 30 years had helped steal them in the first place. Stay with Walter Gann for this story. Some thefts do not need fences cut or gates opened. They only need records changed while good people are not looking. And sometimes, the old thing everyone laughs at is the only witness still honest enough to speak. The Bellwether County surplus auction was held behind the old livestock office, where cracked asphalt gave way to yellow grass, and a cold March wind pushed paper cups beneath parked pickups. Beyond the chain-link fence, cattle shifted in the sale pens. Walter Gann arrived in a faded brown coat and boots whitened by dried mud. At 74, he still carried himself like the brand inspector he had once been. Quiet, watchful, slow to speak. The county was clearing out filing cabinets, broken chairs, rubber stamps, metal signs, and boxes of records supposedly made useless by computers. The leather brand book sat at the bottom of lot 46. Auctioneer Bud Larkin lifted it with 2 fingers. "Last handwritten brand register in Bellwether County," he called. "Perfect for somebody who misses 1,958. The crowd laughed. Walter stepped closer. The book was nearly 4 inches thick, its spine split, and its leather soft at the edges. Inside were hand-drawn brands, transfer dates, witness names, and notary marks. He recognized symbols that still appeared on calves every spring. $5, Bud called. No one answered. $2, comes with all the history you can carry. Walter raised his card. A young rancher named Cody Ames glanced back. Planning to register ghosts, Walt? A scrap dealer bid against him. Walter followed him through 10, 18, 26, and finally $38. The dealer shrugged. Sold, Bud said, to Bellwether County's last living filing cabinet. The laughter returned as Walter collected the book. Marin Pike, the county records director, stood beside the auction table holding a county tablet. "That material has no current legal standing," she said. "Every valid brand was digitized years ago." Walter opened the register. Near the center, 3 pages had been cut cleanly from the binding. Why were these removed? Marin's expression tightened. "I wouldn't know. You supervised the conversion." "I supervised a records transfer 21 years ago. I did not inspect every damaged page." Before Walter could answer, his daughter's truck entered the lot. Claire Gann climbed out, wearing hospital scrubs beneath a heavy jacket. She saw the book and stopped. "Please tell me that came free with something useful." "It cost $38. The roof over your kitchen leaks into a bucket. Only when it rains. That is what roofs are for." Several men smiled. The joke had shifted from the old book to the old man holding it. Claire lowered her voice. "But not enough. The pasture note is due in 30 days. Your feed account is late. I spent yesterday asking the bank not to cut your credit." "I know. And you bought something the county threw away. They sold it. That distinction won't save the ranch." Marin heard her. "If Mr. Gann needs verified ownership records, he can request certified digital copies through my office." Walter looked down at the severed pages. "Computers remember what they're told," he said. "Paper remembers who touched it." Nobody laughed, but no one followed him when he carried the book to his truck. That evening, Walter placed it beneath the hanging lamp over his kitchen table. Rain tapped the window. A blue bucket waited beneath the stain in the ceiling. Black ink marked original brands. Blue ink recorded transfers. Faint red figures appeared beside only certain entries. They were too short to be loan amounts, and too regular to be cattle counts. Walter tilted one page beneath the light and saw pressure marks where another sheet had once rested above it. He laid thin paper over the impression and rubbed it with a pencil. A name emerged: Earl Gunn. His dead brother, Earl, had worked in the county records office, while the old books were converted to microfilm and then to computers. Walter had defended him against every rumor that followed his death 3 years earlier. He turned the page. Beside Earl's signature was the brand of Ruth Mercer, a widow 9 miles east who planned to sell her spring calves to pay for medical treatment. The transfer date was 18 years old. Walter knew Ruth's husband had still owned that brand then. He also knew Earl had known it. At first light, Walter would drive to Ruth Mercer's ranch and ask about a sale she had never mentioned. If she said it had never happened, the $38 book would no longer be a relic. It would be an accusation. Walter reached Ruth Mercer's ranch just after sunrise. The place sat 9 miles east of Bellwether, where the paved road narrowed into gravel and the prairie opened beneath a pale sky. Frost silvered the fence wire. Black calves waited behind the windbreak. Ruth was already outside, carrying 2 buckets toward the trough. At 71, she moved slowly but without hesitation, wearing her late husband's canvas coat. Walter stepped from his truck with the brand book wrapped in an old flour sack. "You're early," Ruth said. "I need to ask about a transfer." Walter opened the book against the hood and turned to the page bearing her family's mark, a half-moon beneath a short bar. Ruth leaned closer. "That's ours. It says the brand transferred 18 years ago." "To who?" Walter pointed to the blue entry. Ruth read the company name twice. "I've never heard of them. Did Tom ever borrow against the herd?" "Not without telling me. Did Earl Gann handle paperwork for you?" At the name, Ruth looked up. "Your brother came here once." Walter felt the cold more sharply. "When?" "Not long before the county moved the records. Tom was sick that winter. Earl brought a packet and said one transfer had been copied wrong." "Did Tom sign anything?" "A correction form." "Do you still have it?" "In the house." Her kitchen smelled of coffee and cedar smoke. Ruth opened a metal cash box and removed a certificate protected inside wax paper. The original registration date was stamped 12 years before the transfer listed in Walter's book. Tom Mercer's signature ran along the bottom, with 2 witnesses beneath it. Ruth handed Walter another page. "This is the correction Earl brought." The form confirmed that the Mercer brand remained in Tom and Ruth's joint ownership. It carried Earl's initials and a county seal dated 4 months after the supposed transfer. Both documents could not be true. "Why didn't you file this?" Walter asked. "We did. Marin's father took the original. Earl told us to keep a copy." Walter studied Earl's initials. They leaned slightly left, the way Earl wrote, after breaking 2 fingers in a shoot accident at 19. The signature beside the transfer in the brand book was smooth and upright. Walter remembered that hand. He remembered nearly everything about Earl before the final year of his life. The Gann brothers had grown up on 40 acres of hard pasture. Their father believed paper was a necessary nuisance. Their mother kept every receipt in flour tins and could calculate interest faster than the banker. Walter learned cattle. He could recognize a ranch from a blurred brand seen through dust and could tell when a mark had been altered. Earl learned records. He understood deeds, liens, probate notices, and the language lenders used when they wanted a frightened family to sign quickly. He left the ranch for a county job. Walter stayed behind and told everyone Earl did more good at a desk than most men did on horseback. During the farm crisis, that belief kept Walter from asking questions. Their father died with feed bills stacked beside his bed. Interest rose. Calf prices fell. The bank scheduled an auction for the Gann herd. 3 days before the sale, Earl arrived after dark with a folder beneath his coat. "It's handled," he said. Walter asked how. Earl said the county had corrected an old acreage error. A revised valuation allowed the loan to be extended. Their mother cried from relief. Walter signed where Earl pointed. The auction was canceled. For years, Walter treated that night as proof that Earl could solve what other men could not. He never asked whose number had changed, which file had been corrected, or why Earl burned the carbon copies before leaving. Gratitude had been easier than suspicion. The distance between the brothers came much later. After retiring, Earl grew restless. He drove to the ranch without warning and asked Walter whether he still had their father's branding iron. He began leaving messages after midnight. There are things in those old books that shouldn't have made it into the computers. That was the first. I need you to remember what happened in '89. That was the second. The third came after Walter learned Earl had borrowed against a small house. Their mother left them both. Walter called him a liar. Earl said, "You don't know what I was trying to keep." Walter answered, "I know what you took." He hung up. 6 days later, Earl's truck left the road in heavy rain and struck the wall of a dry irrigation channel. The sheriff called it an accident. Walter attended the funeral and told himself there had been nothing left worth saying, but there had been one final voicemail. Walter had listened only to the first 7 seconds. "Walt, I signed things I should never have signed." He never finished it. Now, in Ruth Mercer's kitchen, those words returned with a weight they had not carried before. Ruth watched him fold the correction form. Was Earl stealing brands? Walter stared at his brother's initials. "I don't know. That isn't what your face says. My face remembers a man who saved my ranch." Ruth's voice softened. "Maybe he did." Walter looked at the 2 documents again. "And maybe he saved it with something that belonged to somebody else." Outside, one of Ruth's calves bawled from the holding pen. In 5 days, she was supposed to take 23 of them to the bellwether sale. Without that check, she could not pay for the treatment her doctor had scheduled. Walter copied the dates, witness names, and seal number into a notebook, then returned the originals. "Don't take those calves anywhere yet. I don't have the luxury of waiting. Give me 1 day." "For what?" Walter closed the brand book. "To find out whether Earl tried to correct one lie or hide 100 of them." As he drove away, he passed the turn toward his own ranch. He did not take it. Instead, he headed toward the abandoned county archive building, where the old microfilm boxes had been stored before the digital conversion. For the first time since Earl's funeral, Walter was no longer trying to protect his brother's memory. He was trying to test it. Walter found the abandoned county archive behind the courthouse annex, a low brick building with boarded windows and weeds pressing through the loading dock. Most records had been moved years ago. What remained was waiting for a demolition contract the county had not funded. A chain crossed the front door. Walter was studying a rusted service entrance when Claire's voice came from behind him. "You planning to add breaking and entering to the family resume?" She stood beside her truck, still wearing the dark jacket from her hospital shift. "I called your house," she said. "Then Ruth Mercer called me." Walter looked at the locked door. "I need the old microfilm. You need feed, you need a roof. And you need to stop carrying a county record that may not belong to you." It was sold at auction. So were broken desks. Walter placed the brand book on the truck hood. Its split spine exposed linen cords darkened by age. Grease marked the lower corners where clerks had turned the same pages for decades. A brown ring from a coffee cup crossed one transfer, and tiny grains of red dust still clung near the binding. "To most people, this is a list of marks," he said. "It isn't." He opened to the first section. Every brand had been drawn by hand: bars, hooks, circles, letters, wings, and forks. Beside each mark were owners, witnesses, transfers, liens, releases, and notes about altered irons. "A brand doesn't only say who owns an animal today," Walter said. "It shows where that animal came from, which debt followed it, and who swore the transfer was real." Claire folded her arms. "The computer contains the same information. It contains what somebody entered." Walter showed her a page with 3 layers of writing. The original black ink had faded brown. A transfer had later been added in blue. Near the binding sat a faint red number. He turned the page toward the sun. The blue ink pools at the bottom of the letters. Steel nib. The black came from a fountain pen. Different years, which is normal. But look here. He laid thin paper over the page and rubbed it with a pencil. Indented lines appeared. A former owner's name emerged beneath the graphite, followed by a release date missing from the visible record. Claire leaned closer. "Someone erased it?" "They wrote on a clean sheet while this page was underneath. The pressure carried through. So the old book remembers who touched it." Walter glanced at her. That was Earl's way of saying it. They moved through the register. Red markings appeared beside only certain brands. Some were 4 digits, followed by a dash and a year. One sequence sat beside the Gan brand and ended in 89. Claire saw it. 1989. The year Earl arrived with the folder that stopped their herd auction. Walter turned another page. The Mercer code ended the same way. Were they tied to the same loan? Claire asked. I don't know. You said Uncle Earl saved our ranch with an acreage correction. That is what he told us. Claire searched photographs from Earl's probate box and enlarged an old receipt. The amount was $8,940. The red sequence beside the GAN entry read 8,940 to 89. Claire looked at Walter. He paid somebody, or recorded what somebody paid, to save our ranch. Maybe. And the Mercer code? Walter copied it beneath the GAN number. If these are money, Earl may have been tracking debts. His debts? Or favors? Claire stepped away from the hood. You spent my whole life telling me Earl was the reason we kept that land. He was. You don't know that anymore. No. The word hurt more when spoken aloud. Walter closed the book and examined the inside cover. The leather had separated from the board. Beneath it, someone had penciled a sequence too faint to see beneath his kitchen lamp. BX, 14, MF, 203, payday, 7. They were not dollar amounts. Walter recognized the archive notation. BX meant box. MF meant microfilm reel. The final letters usually identified an office or institution that had received a copy. Box 14, he said. Microfilm 203. What is PD? The service door opened behind them. Marin Pike stepped onto the loading dock holding a county keyring. You cannot remove anything from this building. Walter turned. I haven't entered it. You were not authorized to come here. It used to be a public archive. It is condemned. Claire raised her phone. Then why are you inside? Marin ignored her and stared at the register. That book was included in the auction by mistake. You said it had no legal value, Walter replied. It is still county property. Then refund my $38. This is not a joke. No. It stopped being one when Ruth Mercer's ownership disappeared. Marin's expression remained controlled, but her hand tightened around the keys. Walter showed her the code. Box 14, Reel 203. What does PD stand for? For a moment, Marin looked toward the dark doorway behind her. Then she said, Prairie Dominion. Claire frowned. The finance company? Marin's silence answered first. The red figures, missing pages, altered transfer, and hidden code were no longer separate curiosities. They formed a trail leading to a company that had never raised cattle, repaired a fence, or stood inside a sale ring. Marin stepped backward. Tomorrow morning, the county attorney will file to recover that book. Walter held her Chase. Then I have until tomorrow morning to learn why you're afraid of it. She shut the door. Walter looked down at the faded leather cover. The county would soon try to take it from him. Before that happened, he needed to place its first accusation in front of someone who could not dismiss it as an old man's memory. That meant going to the bank. Walter reached Bellwether Community Bank 10 minutes after it opened. The lobby had been remodeled since the days when ranchers carried calf sale receipts folded inside shirt pockets. Screens glowed behind glass partitions, and a digital board advertised agricultural loans beneath a photograph of cattle standing in grass, far greener than anything growing in Bellwether County that spring. Walter carried the brand book inside a canvas feed sack. Claire followed him to the agricultural desk. You said you needed the bank to extend the pasture note, she said. Do that first. Don't walk in accusing people of stealing cattle. I'm asking them to verify what they already lend against. A loan officer named Ethan Cole looked up from his monitor. Ethan was 32, neat-haired, and careful with the expression he used for older customers who arrived without appointments. Mr. Gann, I reviewed your daughter's message. My feed credit was frozen, temporarily. My cattle still eat permanently. Ethan invited them into a glass-walled office. Walter placed the brand book on the desk. Dust flaked from the leather and landed beside Ethan's keyboard. Ethan moved the keyboard away. I need 30 days on the pasture note, Walter said, and I need the feed line restored. The bank can consider an extension if the collateral remains verified. It does. Ethan opened Walter's account, entered the brand number, and stopped. He asked Walter to confirm the family mark, a bent G over a short rail. Ethan turned the monitor. The symbol was there. So was Walter's name. But beside it, in a column labeled Secured Interest, appeared Prairie Dominion Agricultural Holdings. That company has no interest in my herd, Walter said. The system shows the brand was included in a commercial livestock portfolio 18 months ago. I never signed that. The transfer was certified through the county database. Show me the original. This is the certified record. That is a screen. Walter opened the brand book to the GAN page. He pointed to the original registration, the release notation pressed into the paper, and the red code near the binding. This is older than your database. There is no lawful transfer here. Ethan glanced at the page but did not touch it. We lend against verified assets, Mr. Gahn, not memories. Claire stiffened. Walter's voice stayed quiet. I inspected brands for 27 years. I understand. No. You understand what that screen tells you. Ethan's face reddened. Until the discrepancy is resolved, the bank cannot count those 93 head as uncontested collateral. 93? That is the current herd count attached to your brand. Walter sat back. His pasture note, feed line, and nearly every animal he owned were now tied to a company he had never dealt with. Claire asked, what happens if the note comes due before this is fixed? The bank could require additional collateral. There isn't any, she said. Walter looked through the glass wall. Cody Ames, the young rancher who had mocked him at the auction, noticed the old book on Ethan's desk. Print the transfer, Walter said. I cannot release another party's secured documents without authorization. It concerns my cattle. It also concerns Prairie Dominion. Then call them. Ethan stood. I think this meeting should end. Walter did not move. Restore my feed line. I cannot. Give me a written reason. You'll receive notice. I want it now. Ethan opened the office door and signaled to the security guard. Claire touched Walter's arm. Dad. Walter gathered the book. One loose page slid free, struck the floor, and skated into the lobby. Then another fell. He bent to pick them up, but his knee locked halfway down. Claire moved first. Cody watched from beside the teller line. Careful, Walt, he said. Wouldn't want the county's whole history blowing away. A few people laughed. Not many. Enough. Walter straightened with Claire's help. Your cattle clear for sale this week? He asked Cody. Cody smiled. Mine are paid for. So are mine. Walter tucked the pages into the sack and walked out. On the front steps, Claire turned on him. You got exactly what I warned you about. I got a number. You lost your credit. It was already gone. Now I know how many cattle they attached to the transfer. 93 cattle are not a clue. They are everything you have. A county vehicle pulled into the lot. Marin Pike stepped out with Assistant County Attorney Joel Haskins, who carried a document envelope. We are serving notice that the county intends to recover the register pending a property review, Marin said. The petition described the book as a mistakenly disposed public record whose continued possession could compromise an active administrative process. A hearing had been requested for the next morning. You told everyone it was obsolete, Claire said. Obsolete records can still contain protected information. Protected from whom? Walter asked. Marin did not answer. Across the street, a livestock trailer rolled toward the Bellwether sale barn. The Half Moon brand beneath a short bar showed clearly on the nearest calf. Ruth Mercer was driving. Walter checked the time. She's early. You told her not to sell, Claire said. She said she couldn't wait. They reached the sale barn as Ruth backed toward the unloading chute. A clerk scanned the first calf's tag, entered the brand, and frowned. He tried again. The gate remained closed. What is it? Ruth called. The clerk stepped toward her window. I can't accept this lot. I have 23 calves booked. Your brand has a secured hold. By who? He turned the tablet so she could see. Prairie Dominion Agricultural Holdings. Ruth stared at the screen. Behind her, calves shifted against the trailer rails. Walter opened the brand book to the Mercer page. This was no longer only about 93 GAN cattle or one widow's missing transfer. Two families now stood in the same sale yard with animals they had raised, fed, and branded but could no longer legally sell. Then another truck stopped behind Ruth's. And another. By noon, Walter would learn that the same warning had begun appearing under brands all across Bellwether County. By 11 that morning, 5 trailers were waiting outside the Bellwether sale barn. None had been unloaded. Walter stood beside Ruth's truck while clerks moved from cab to cab, repeating the same explanation. Secured hold. Disputed brand. Pending verification. No sale permitted. Some ranchers cursed. Others called banks or lawyers. A few simply sat behind their steering wheels, staring at cattle they could feed, but could no longer legally sell. Ruth kept both hands on the wheel. My appointment is Monday, she said. If I miss the deposit, they move me to the end of the schedule. Walter looked at the trailers. This is bigger than one transfer. That doesn't make mine smaller. No. He opened the brand book on her hood and copied every blocked brand he could see. Cody Ames was third in line. When Walter approached, Cody looked away. What did the screen show? Walter asked. Prairie Dominion. How many head? 68. Any loan with them? No. The laughter from the bank lobby was gone. By noon, Walter had 8 brand numbers. Ruth called 2 neighboring ranchers and found 3 more. Claire searched county notices and found 6 families who had received unexplained collateral warnings. 17 ranches. The names were spread across the county, but the transfer dates clustered within the same 30-month period when the handwritten files had been converted to microfilm. Walter needed someone who understood seals, signatures, and what could legally exist on a given date. He drove to the home of Lyle Benton, a retired notary and former deputy clerk who lived behind a shuttered feed mill. Lyle answered wearing suspenders and one slipper. I retired because people stopped bringing me paper, he said. Walter handed him a copy of Ruth's disputed transfer. Lyle adjusted his glasses. That seal is wrong. Claire, who had joined Walter after her shift, leaned closer. How wrong? Lyle pointed to the outer ring. Bellwether County changed the seal after the courthouse fire. This design wasn't issued until 1994. The transfer was dated 1991. Ruth's ownership had supposedly been signed away using a stamp that did not yet exist. Lyle opened a cabinet and pulled out commission records. The notary named on the transfer, Harold Wren, had lost his commission 2 years before the listed date. Could it be a scanning error? Claire asked. A scanner can blur a seal, Lyle said. It cannot send one backward in time. Walter felt the first clean certainty since opening the book. The record was not merely incomplete, it was false. Lyle checked 3 more transfers. One used the wrong seal. Another listed a witness who had died 6 months earlier. A third carried a notary number assigned to a different county. Claire photographed every discrepancy. Walter placed the brand book beside the printouts. The handwritten entries did not contain the false seals. Instead, each disputed transfer had a red code beside it. Lyle traced one number. Those look like archival references. That is what I thought, Walter said. This section could be real and frame numbers. Old microfilm systems logged both. The false lead began to collapse. The numbers were not debts, gambling losses, or secret payments. They were directions. Earl had not been recording how much each family owed. He had marked where the earlier version of each record could be found. Walter copied the code from Ruth's entry and compared it with the notation beneath the book's cover. BX 14 to MF 203 to PD Zaben. Lyle recognized the pattern. Box 14, microfilm reel 203, frame 7, and PD? Prairie Dominion did not exist then. But Prairie Development did. Walter remembered the name. Prairie Development had bought distressed agricultural paper during the farm crisis, then disappeared after a federal investigation in another state. Claire searched the business registry. Prairie Development had been dissolved. Its assets passed through 2 holding companies before being acquired by Prairie Dominion Agricultural Holdings. The companies were separated by decades and layers of paperwork, but they shared the same bones. Walter laid out the 17 brand numbers. Each disputed transfer pointed toward a file that had moved through the old company's portfolio. This was not a random migration error, he said. Lyle nodded. Random errors scatter. These all travel in one direction, toward Prairie Dominion. Claire called Ethan Cole and gave him the seal dates, expired commission, and 17 brand numbers. Ethan was quiet. I need to verify this internally, he said. While you verify it, people cannot sell cattle, Claire replied. I understand. No, you understand what your screen tells you. The words landed differently when Claire used them. Ethan promised to review the portfolio documents. Walter returned to the sale barn before closing. The trailers were still there. He climbed onto the concrete step beside the office and read the 17 family names aloud. A rancher in the back added another, then another. By sunset, the list had grown to 31. Marin arrived with the county attorney's petition, expecting to take the brand book. Instead, she found Walter surrounded by ranchers holding transfers with impossible seals and signatures from dead witnesses. For the first time, she did not ask for the book. She asked how many names he had. 31 so far. Marin looked toward the trailers. That is not possible. It is already more possible than the records you certified. A clerk ran from the sale office carrying a tablet. The hold was no longer limited to Bellwether. A statewide livestock clearing system had flagged every brand linked to the same portfolio. The number kept climbing: 48, 73, 112. By the time it stopped, the sale yard had gone silent. 214 ranches. Walter had found the first proof that the old book was right, but the same search had frozen cattle across the county. And by morning, every rancher on that list would want to know whether Walter Gann had saved them or started the disaster that could bankrupt them all. The emergency meeting began before sunrise inside the Bellwether sale barn. Metal bleachers filled with ranchers who had spent the night calling banks, feed suppliers, and attorneys. Some still wore yesterday's work clothes. Others carried folders containing brand certificates, loan notices, and sale receipts. At the center of the ring stood a folding table beneath the auction lights. Walter placed the brand book on it. The room quieted, but not because everyone trusted him. 214 ranches had been frozen after he began asking questions. Families who had planned to sell calves that week were now borrowing feed money. Buyers had begun avoiding Bellwether cattle entirely. Cody Ames stood near the front. "You said that book would clear this up. I said it would tell us where to look. And now nobody can sell." Walter did not defend himself. He opened the register beneath a document camera borrowed from the courthouse. A page appeared on the large sale board where cattle prices were normally displayed. Black ink showed the original brand. Blue ink showed the disputed transfer. Red figures sat beside both. Walter explained the pattern once, carefully. The first number identified an archive box. The second identified a microfilm reel. The final number marked a frame. When the codes were compared with the transfer files, they led to versions created before the database was altered. "This was not a list of debts," Walter said. "It was a map." A rancher called from the bleachers. "Made by who?" Walter looked at Earl's handwriting. "My brother." Murmurs moved through the room. Lyle Benton displayed the impossible seals and expired notary commissions. Claire projected the corporate history connecting Prairie Development to the portfolio, now controlled by Prairie Dominion. The evidence showed the transfers could not all be legitimate. For the first time since the holds began, the ranchers saw a path toward proving ownership. Ruth Mercer stood beside the loading gate, one hand gripping the rail. "Then release the cattle," she said. Marin Pike rose from a chair near the county attorney. "I cannot." The room turned against her. She carried a sealed archive sleeve to the table and removed a microfilm print. "This was found in a restricted county box last night." Walter recognized the Gann brand at the top. Beneath it was a transfer form dated 1989. Unlike the disputed copy in the brand book, this document contained no impossible seal. The notary was active. Both witnesses were alive on the date listed, and Earl's signature leaned slightly left. The way it did after he broke his fingers. Walter bent closer. This was not a copied signature. Earl had signed it. Marin placed another document beside the first. Then a third. 23 transfers carried Earl's verified handwriting. The ranchers who had begun leaning toward Walter now pulled back. Cody spoke first. "Your brother did this?" Walter did not answer. Marin pointed to the transfer involving the Gann pasture. "The acreage correction that prevented your family's foreclosure was part of the same transaction chain." Claire stared at the page. What was transferred away? Marin slid forward the second document. 40 acres previously attached to the Mercer Ranch had been reassigned through a holding company before appearing inside the Gann valuation. Ruth stepped away from the rail. Walter felt every eye in the sale barn move from the screen to him. For years, he had believed Earl saved their land by correcting an error. Now, the paper showed something else. The Gann Ranch had survived because another family's property had been weakened. A man in a dark suit entered through the side gate. He carried no ranch folder and wore shoes too clean for the sale barn floor. "My name is Grant Vale," he said. "I represent Prairie Dominion Agricultural Holdings." The ranchers began shouting. Grant waited until the noise fell. Prairie Dominion purchased a portfolio certified by Bellwether County and several participating banks. "My client did not create the original records." "You're using them," Ruth said. "My client is enforcing legally acquired interests against cattle we raised. Ownership is precisely what the courts will determine." Grant placed a thick envelope beside the brand book. He addressed Walter directly. "The county will ask the court to recover this register today. Prairie Dominion will support that petition. Walter did not touch the envelope. What is that? A proposed resolution. Grant spoke loudly enough for the room to hear only part of it. Prairie Dominion would release its claim against Walter's 93 cattle. It would refinance his pasture note, restore his feed line, and agree not to challenge the Gann family's 40 acres. In return, Walter would surrender the brand book, withdraw his claims regarding the portfolio, and decline to testify about Earl's archive codes. Cody laughed once, without humor. They're buying him. Grant looked toward him. We are resolving an individual dispute. There are 214 individual disputes, Walter said. Then 214 families may pursue them through appropriate channels. Grant lowered his voice. If you refuse, Prairie Dominion will seek immediate control of every animal carrying the Gann brand. The county may also pursue charges regarding possession and disclosure of protected records. Claire stepped closer. What charges? Removal of government property, unauthorized publication of private financial information, interference with secured assets. The county sold him the book, she said. That question will be litigated. Grant opened the envelope. There was more. If the original Gann valuation was fraudulent, the bank could accelerate Walter's pasture loan. The 40 disputed acres could be placed under injunction. Walter might be required to account for decades of income earned from land that should never have belonged to his family. Claire read the first page. Her face changed. If Walter fought, there might be nothing left for her to inherit. Grant capped his pen and placed it on the table. You have until 6 o'clock this evening. Walter looked toward the bleachers. The ranchers no longer saw only the old inspector who found a forgotten book. They saw a man whose family had benefited from the same system now threatening them. Some looked angry. Others looked betrayed. Ruth looked tired. Walter closed the register. The brand book had finally made people listen. It had also given Prairie Dominion everything it needed to destroy him. When Walter left the sale barn, Claire followed him into the cold morning. He did not drive toward the courthouse. He drove home. There were deeds to collect, cattle to count, and a ranch he might have to leave before the week was over. Walter reached the Gann ranch shortly before noon. He parked beside the loading chute and sat behind the wheel, without turning off the engine. Beyond the windshield, 93 cattle moved through the winter pasture, nosing among the short grass and scattered hay. He had raised some of their mothers. Others carried bloodlines. His father had begun recording before Walter was old enough to hold a branding iron. By 6 o'clock, Prairie Dominion wanted his answer. Walter took a yellow livestock notebook from the glove compartment and began counting. 32 cows in the north pasture, 27 near the creek fence, 14 yearlings behind the windbreak, 11 calves, 9 head in the hospital lot and barn pens, 93, the same number that appeared on Ethan Cole's screen. Walter wrote each ear tag number beneath the count. If the herd was seized, he wanted a record of every animal that left. Claire arrived while he was checking the feed bins. She carried 2 empty file boxes. So you have decided to fight, she said. I have decided to be ready. For what? For either answer. Inside the house, Walter removed the Gann deed, pasture note, insurance papers, cattle registrations, and his mother's probate file from a cabinet. He placed each document in a box. Claire watched from the kitchen doorway. You are packing. I am organizing. You only organize when you think somebody is about to take something. Walter glanced at the blue bucket beneath the leaking ceiling. There may not be much time afterward. Claire crossed the room. Grant's agreement keeps you here. It keeps me on land that may belong to Ruth. 40 acres may have been involved in an old valuation. That does not mean the whole ranch was stolen. It means I cannot sign anything until I know. You already know enough to lose everything. Walter closed the first box. That is not the same as knowing the truth. Claire turned away. For several seconds, only the rain against the window filled the room. This ranch is not only yours, she said. Walter looked at her. You told me to sell it. I wanted you safe. I did not want it taken. She touched the edge of the deed box. Mom died here. Grandpa built the east barn. I learned to ride in that pasture. You keep talking as if giving it up would cost only you. Walter had no answer that would make the choice easier. So he carried the second box to Earl's workshop. The building had not been used since the funeral. Dust covered the workbench. Earl's vise remained half open, and a coil of baling wire hung from a nail above it. Walter found the old branding iron beneath a canvas tarp, the bent G over the short rail. He ran his hand along the cold metal. Earl had asked about it in the last months of his life. Walter had assumed he wanted to sell it or remove it before another argument. Now Walter examined the wooden handle. A narrow groove had been carved near the end. The shape matched the blade of Earl's pocket knife. Walter took the knife from his coat, opened the smaller blade, and pressed it into the groove. A section of the workbench released with a dry click. Claire stepped closer. Behind the front board was a shallow steel drawer. It contained no money. Inside were 6 microfilm reels, 23 transfer copies, 3 sealed envelopes, a small tape recorder, and a list of brand numbers written in Earl's hand. 214 names. Walter lifted the recorder. A strip of masking tape across the back read, "For Walt all of it." The batteries were dead. Claire found replacements in a cabinet. When Walter pressed play, Earl's voice entered the workshop, older than Walter remembered. Tired. "Walt, if you are hearing this, I either finally found the courage to tell you, or I ran out of time." Walter stood motionless. Earl explained that the scheme began during the farm crisis. Bellwether banks were collapsing under unpaid agricultural loans. County officials feared hundreds of foreclosures would destroy the tax base. Prairie Development offered a solution. Distressed brands, acreage interests, and livestock liens were transferred into temporary holding companies. The strongest ranches received extensions. The weakest families lost pieces of ownership without understanding what they had signed. Earl had been told the transfers were temporary. They were not. "I signed 23, Earl said. "The first one saved us." Walter lowered his head. The tape continued. The Mercer acreage had been reassigned to strengthen the Gann valuation. Earl believed he could reverse it after the bank withdrew the foreclosure. But Prairie Development bundled the altered interests into a larger portfolio. By the time Earl understood, the records had passed through so many companies that correcting one transfer threatened every loan connected to it. He began preserving copies. He marked the brand book with reel and frame numbers. He prepared letters to the affected families, but he never sent them. "I told myself I was protecting Ma. Then I told myself I was protecting you. After she died, I told myself the county would collapse if the truth came out." Earl paused on the recording. "The truth is, I was protecting the version of myself people still respected." Claire covered her mouth. Walter listened as Earl named officials, bankers, and files. Some people had known everything. Others had signed documents without understanding the scheme. Marin's father had taken Ruth's original correction form and buried it inside a restricted archive box. Earl's final words were quieter. "The land did save us, Walt. It just was not ours to be saved by." The tape clicked off. Walter opened the sealed envelopes. One was addressed to Ruth Mercer, one to the county court. The third was addressed to Walter. Inside was a single page. "Do not defend me. Finish what I would not." Walter read it twice. Claire sat on Earl's stool. "If you release this, the Mercer family can claim the 40 acres. They should. And Prairie Dominion will take the herd while the court decides everything else. Maybe. What happens to you?" Walter looked through the workshop window toward the pasture. "I leave if I have to." Claire's eyes filled, but her voice remained steady. "You say that like leaving is the brave part." Walter looked at the letter in his hand. "No. The brave part would have been doing this 30 years ago." He copied the microfilm, Earl's recording, and all 23 transfers. The originals went into the brand book's canvas sack. He placed the Gann deed in a separate envelope with a handwritten statement consenting to an immediate review of the disputed 40 acres. At 5:30, Walter called Grant Vail. "I have an answer." Grant asked whether he would sign. "No." Walter ended the call before Grant could threaten him again. Then he carried the brand book, Earl's confession, and the Gann deed to Claire's truck. The county hearing began at 6. This time, Walter would not enter the room asking anyone to believe his family. He would ask them to judge it. The county hearing had been moved into the Bellwether Grange Hall because too many ranchers had come. Every folding chair was taken. Men and women stood along the walls holding sale notices. Some had driven all night. Others had left cattle in trailers because they could not afford another week of feed. At the front, Judge Helena Ward sat behind a temporary bench. Marin Pike and the county attorney sat to her right. Grant Vail and 2 Prairie Dominion lawyers sat to her left. Walter entered carrying the canvas sack. The room changed when people saw him. No one laughed. No one welcomed him either. Ruth Mercer sat in the first row. Claire walked Walter to the witness table, then stopped. "This is yours," she said. Walter nodded. The county argued that the brand book was public property mistakenly sold at auction. Prairie Dominion argued that Walter had used an uncertified record to disrupt lawful livestock transactions. Grant stood. Because of Mr. Gann's allegations, 214 ranches are now unable to complete sales or move secured livestock. The harm is immediate. Walter looked toward the ranchers. Grant was not wrong about the harm. He was wrong about where it began. When Walter was called, he did not start with the false seals or archive codes. He placed the Gann deed on the table. "My family's ranch includes 40 acres that may have been taken from the Mercer property through a transfer my brother signed in 1989. A murmur crossed the room. "I benefited from that transfer. My daughter would have inherited land strengthened by it. If this court finds that acreage belongs to the Mercer family, I consent to place it in escrow today." Claire closed her eyes for 1 second. Ruth did not move. Grant objected that one property dispute did not prove an entire commercial portfolio was invalid. "I am not asking anyone to believe me because I am giving something up," Walter said. "I am saying I will not ask 214 families to risk their property while I protect mine." Judge Ward allowed him to continue. Walter removed Earl's recorder from the sack, followed by 23 transfer copies, 6 microfilm reels, and the unsent letters. These were hidden in Earl Gann's workshop. The codes in the brand book identify the matching box, reel, and frame for each earlier record. Lyle Benton authenticated the obsolete seals and expired notary commissions. He explained why several transfers could not have been legally executed on their listed dates. Grant argued that clerical irregularities did not prove Prairie Dominion knew what it had purchased. That was when Ethan Cole stood from the back row. "Your Honor, I have records relevant to notice and knowledge." The bank's attorney reached for his sleeve. Ethan stepped away. He produced internal reviews showing that Prairie Dominion had asked the bank to disregard mismatches between county brand records and livestock insurance certificates. 3 analysts had flagged ownership inconsistencies before the portfolio was enforced. Grant's expression changed. "Those are confidential banking documents. They are also evidence that your client was warned," Ethan said. Judge Ward ordered the documents sealed. Walter looked at Ethan. There was no apology between them. Not yet, but there was an action. Marin Pike stood next. "My office has a backup server created during the final stage of digitization," she said. "It contains edit logs excluded from the certified system." Judge Ward asked why it had not been disclosed. Marin looked toward the empty space beside her. "Because it may show records were altered under my father's administration. I told myself releasing it would cause more damage than hiding it. And now? Now the damage is sitting in this room." She handed over a storage drive and her county keys. The evidence did not create a clean victory. It created a larger mess. Some transfers were forged. Others carried real signatures obtained through deceptive loan agreements. Several ranches had changed hands more than once. Some original owners were dead. In a few cases, cattle had been sold years earlier, making full recovery impossible. Judge Ward recessed for 43 minutes. Nobody celebrated. Ruth passed Walter without speaking. Claire stood beside him near the back wall. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "The land? All of it." Walter watched Grant whispering into his phone. "I regret waiting until it became expensive." The judge returned shortly after 9. Her temporary order did 4 things. Prairie Dominion could not seize livestock tied to the disputed portfolio. Sale barns could permit necessary cattle sales, although proceeds above essential operating costs would remain in escrow. All 214 transfers would undergo independent review, and the brand book, confession, microfilm, server backup, and bank records would remain under court control. The ranchers had not won their property back, but they had time. For many of them, time meant the difference between feeding a herd and losing one. Grant gathered his files. "This is temporary," he told Walter. "So was the lie," Walter replied. It lasted 37 years. Outside, reporters waited beneath the porch lights. Walter did not make a speech. Cody Ames approached first. "I was wrong about the book." Walter nodded. Cody waited for forgiveness. Walter offered neither. Ruth came down the steps holding the escrow order. "My treatment deposit can be released from the calf sale," she said. "I heard. And the 40 acres? The court will decide." "You already did." Walter looked toward Claire. "No. I only decided not to hide from it." Ruth studied him. Earl should have done that. Yes. So should you. Yes. She walked away without thanking him. That was fair. By midnight, the sale barn gates reopened for essential sales. Walter's ranch remained under review, but trailers began moving again. He and Claire stood beside the brand book as a court clerk sealed it inside a clear evidence bag. For the first time since the auction, Walter let someone else carry it away. The book had brought the truth into a room where everyone had to choose what to do with it. Now the court would decide who owned the land. The next months would decide what Walter had left. Only after that would anyone understand what the old book had truly saved. The temporary order did not make Bellwether peaceful. It only gave the county time to discover how much damage had been hidden beneath its records. For the next 2 weeks, the sale barn opened under court supervision. Ranchers could sell enough cattle to cover feed, medicine, and payroll, but the remaining proceeds went into escrow. Every transaction required extra signatures. Every brand had to be checked twice. Anger moved through town more quickly than relief. Some families blamed Prairie Dominion. Some blamed the county. Others blamed Walter for opening the book before anyone had prepared for what it contained. Walter did not argue with them. He spent his mornings at the courthouse helping the independent review team read the old register. In the afternoons, he returned home to a herd he still might lose. Ethan Cole came to the ranch on the third evening. He parked near the loading chute but remained inside his car for several minutes. When he finally stepped out, he carried no bank folder. "I was placed on leave," he said. Walter continued repairing a gate hinge. "For giving the court those reviews? For not reporting them when I first saw them." Walter set down the wrench. Ethan looked toward the pasture. "When you came into my office, I decided what kind of man you were before I checked what the bank had done. That was the easy mistake. The harder one was seeing the warnings afterward and telling myself someone above me would handle them." Walter waited. "I am sorry," Ethan said. Walter did not tell him everything was forgiven. "What are you going to do with that?" Ethan nodded, as if he had expected the question. He had contacted 3 regional feed suppliers and persuaded them to honor the frozen ranch accounts for 30 days. The bank would not finance the extension, so Ethan had put his own severance money into the first guarantee. It was not enough to save 214 ranches. It was enough to keep 11 of the smallest herds fed through the first review period. Walter shook his hand. That was all. Marin Pike made her apology differently. She resigned as records director, then asked Judge Ward for permission to help reconstruct the archive under supervision. For 6 days, she worked alone in the condemned records building, listing every missing reel, copied transfer, and altered entry. When she appeared before the ranchers, she did not blame her father. "He hid the first correction," she said. "I hid the evidence that his system had been changed. I told myself silence was different from fraud." She placed the old server inventory on the table. It was not different to the families who lost something. Some ranchers accepted the apology. Others walked out. Marin kept working. The community response began without a speech. Cody Ames brought 2 flatbed loads of hay to the sale yard and left before Walter could thank him. The Grange Hall became a temporary records room. Retired clerks read microfilm. High school agriculture students scanned paper certificates. Ranch families created a feed pool for anyone whose sale money remained trapped in escrow. Claire organized the work into 3 tables: original ownership, disputed transfer, and present herd. For the first time, the paper system and the digital system were being compared instead of treated as enemies. Claire posted a rule above the records tables. No family story would be accepted without a document, and no document would be accepted without another source. Walter approved the rule even when it worked against him. When reporters asked him to stand beside the first cleared ranchers, he declined. Their restored brands belonged in the photographs. His family's name belonged in the review pile. Ruth returned from her treatment appointment wearing a wool cap and carrying a folder beneath her arm. The calf sale had covered her deposit, but the rest of the money remained under court control. She found Walter beside the boundary map. "The 40 acres should come back to the Mercer name," he said. "The review is not finished. It is finished enough for me." Walter handed her a signed statement withdrawing any GAN claim to the disputed tract. Ruth read it. "I do not forgive Earl. I did not ask you to. I am not sure I forgive you for living beside that line all these years without wondering why it bent around your pasture." Walter looked at the map. "I did not want to wonder." Ruth closed the folder. "That answer I believe." She did not thank him. She signed the receipt and took the statement to the court clerk. By the end of the month, the first 19 brands had been cleared. None belonged to Walter. Prairie Dominion appealed every release and continued to argue that it had purchased the portfolio in good faith. Grantvale never apologized. He only changed strategies. Walter sold 12 cattle under the supervised sale order and placed the proceeds into the community feed pool. Claire objected until she saw which families received the hay. The gesture did not erase what the Gann Ranch had gained. It kept other ranches alive long enough to seek restitution. One evening, surveyors arrived and drove new stakes along the south pasture. The disputed 40 acres now carried temporary Mercer markers. Walter stood beside Claire as the final stake went into the ground. "What will you do if the court leaves us only what was truly ours?" she asked. Walter looked across the smaller shape of the ranch, learned to live inside the truth. Beyond the new boundary, spring grass had begun to rise. The next season would show whether the Gann Ranch could survive without the land that had never belonged to it. 8 months after the hearing, Bellwether County still had no simple answer for what had happened. The court had restored temporary control of most disputed brands to the families actively raising the cattle. 31 transfers remained under review. 7 involved ranches that had changed hands more than once. 4 cases had no confirmed living heirs. Prairie Dominion continued to deny wrongdoing, but it could no longer enforce the portfolio as if the records were unquestioned truth. The Rancher Cooperative created an emergency feed fund for families whose sales remained tied up in court. Every contribution was recorded publicly. No one wanted another rescue built on favors nobody could trace. The county issued no grand apology. There was no parade for Walter Gann, no plaque on the courthouse wall, and no photograph of him shaking hands with the judge. The 40 disputed acres were returned to the Mercer family through a land trust. Ruth did not move the fence immediately. She allowed Walter's remaining cattle to graze there through the first season while he reduced his herd. He sold 26 head. The money paid overdue feed bills, legal costs, and the final balance on the pasture note. The loss hurt. Walter knew every ear tag, every bloodline, and every cow that stopped at the gate before entering the sale trailer. But when the trucks left, he did not call himself ruined. The Gann Ranch was smaller. That was different from being false. Claire stayed. For years, she had spoken about the ranch as a burden her father refused to release. After the hearings, she began seeing it as something that could survive only if it stopped pretending the past was clean. 2 evenings each week, she worked in the old livestock office with Ethan Cole, Lyle Benton, and a group of younger ranchers. Together, they built a new registration system. Every digital transfer required a matching paper record. Every alteration needed 2 independent witnesses. Copies were stored at the courthouse, the bank, and the Rancher Cooperative. No single clerk, lender, or company could quietly rewrite ownership again. Walter taught them how to examine what databases often ignored. Ink added years later. Pressure marks left by a missing sheet. A seal issued after the date printed beside it. A signature changed by an old injury. He never told them that paper was pure, or that old systems were always better. Earl had proved otherwise. Instead, Walter taught one rule. No record gets trusted because it is old, official, or glowing on a screen. It earns trust by surviving questions. Earl's name remained inside the investigation. Some people wanted him remembered as the man who preserved the evidence. Others saw only the 23 transfers he had signed. Walter defended neither version. When a reporter asked whether Earl had redeemed himself, Walter said, "He left a road back. He should have walked it while he was alive." That answer was printed in the county paper. Ruth cut it out and kept it inside the new Mercer deed file. She and Walter never became close friends. Forgiveness did not arrive in one clean conversation. Some mornings she waved when his truck passed. Other mornings she did not. But when Walter repaired the fence along the returned acreage, Ruth brought him water and held the wire while he set the final post. Neither of them mentioned Earl. They did not need to. The original brand book remained in the courthouse evidence room. Its leather spine was still split, and the 3 missing pages were never recovered. Every few weeks, a clerk carried it into another hearing, placed it beneath the document camera, and opened one faded entry beside one modern claim. The book was not sealed behind glass. It was still working. One evening near the end of summer, Claire brought Walter a new register bound in plain brown leather. The first page was empty except for the date. She placed it on the kitchen table beneath the ceiling Walter had finally repaired. "What goes first?" she asked. Walter looked out the window. The new boundary fence divided the pasture where the old line had once been. On the Mercer side, cattle moved through tall grass. On the Gann side, Walter's smaller herd gathered near the trough. The animals did not understand court orders, loan portfolios, or the difference between a digital file and a handwritten page. They understood gates. They understood who fed them. They understood where they returned at dusk. Walter uncapped a black pen. "Who owns what?" he said. Claire wrote the words. Then Walter added, "And who witnessed it?" She wrote that too. Before closing the book, Claire left space beneath both lines. "For what?" Walter asked. "For whoever comes after us." Walter nodded. Outside, one cow called across the fence. Another answered from the Mercer pasture. The sound carried through the open window and settled over the table where the new register lay beside Earl's pocketknife. The old brand book had never owned a single cow. It had only remembered who did.